Welcome to the Roost Podcast. I am your host, Sean Pitcher. Today, we have a special guest on today, Francis Holway. He is a global leader in anthropometry research, teaching, and education, or how he likes to say, an anthropometry enthusiast. ISAK concepts have been around for many years, but are starting to make their return back to the U.S., utilized by a variety of different practitioners and sports teams, whether it's college and pro. So really excited to dig in to talk about this. I have a lot of interest in it. I'm ISAK certified myself, and I've used it hands-on as well with my athletes. So would love to have this brought to a wider audience to get to learn more about it. But Francis, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me, Sean. It's an honor. So go ahead. See if anything that I can say can interest your audience.
Absolutely. What I want to start with is what is your roots? Who is Francis?
Okay. I'm the product of a history of failures. I'm a dietitian I studied economics first. Also did a year of engineering. I have a BA in economics. Then I started studying nutrition. I took training courses. I worked as a gym instructor, as a personal trainer. Basically, everything I like is related to fitness, performance, body composition, and nutrition, exercise. And so anthropometry and body composition represented a perfect tie-in between nutrition and exercise, because with nutrition and exercise, you can modify your muscle, your body fat, and you can track those changes with body composition analysis. And what you cannot change, you can also measure. You can measure your bone structure. So that was interesting to me. I wanted to know why I wasn't as good as others in sports. Say swimming, my arms weren't long enough. And basketball, I wasn't tall enough. Rugby, my muscle mass wasn't big enough. So I did have the structure for soccer, but I didn't have the skill.
You're like,
So I had
dang,
to
I
go,
had to go through all these different situations to just figure out
yeah,
like this is my sport, but then I'm still coming up short.
yeah. So I had to go to school and work.
Yeah, I always ask myself, I've talked to people, from overseas that have used this concept in the past, and I know they utilize it a lot to try to guide individuals or athletes into a position where their body structure best fits,
Hmm.
the
Yeah.
sport that they may work with better. And I always wonder, like, man, I wish this was around when I was younger too, because like, was football really better for me? Could I have done wrestling? Was it rugby? Like, if I knew kind of these facts or information maybe from a younger age, I could have probably been guided into a sport that best suited essentially my frame and my background and experience from a sports perspective.
Yeah. Yeah. True. True.
And I
At
like
least
that
I
you
would.
start. Go ahead.
At least I wouldn't have wasted so much time insisting on what wasn't good for me, what wasn't right for me.
Yeah, or you just have individuals around you like, oh, I think you're going to be a good X player at this sport, and you get enough people behind you saying that, and you just think, well, I'm not the best, but I'm going to make it work because that's what people are pushing me towards. Versus here's the actual data and information to show like, well, this is what my structure actually could fit into, and this makes a lot more sense.
Yeah,
I
that's
really
right.
like that you started with failure. I think no one's going to really get better unless you fail a lot of times, and it's okay to fail. That's where our growth, our development, learning new skills, communication, talking to new people. I feel like a lot of that essentially comes out from that at the end of the day, having those experiences.
Well, the muscle to bone ratio came out of that. Basically, working as a dietitian, I had recreational bodybuilders that wanted to increase their muscle mass, and I systematically failed to make them increase muscle month after month, no matter what diet or supplements or training they did. They were stuck there, and they all these guys that I had failed with had been training for at least 4 years, and they were very thorough in this the nutrition, their exercise. And if we increase calories and protein, on, use creatine on trained, if they increased in weight, it was all fat.
Mm-hmm.
So then I started analyzing the data on these failures that I had, and they all were at around 5 pounds of muscle for every pound of the skeleton. So that was the first hypothesis, that the 5-to-1 muscle to bone ratio. And then we tried it out. We measured other sports. Sure, there were some people that could go 5.2. African Americans could go 5.5 easily.
Mm-hmm.
But that tended to be the upper threshold, at least for the 25 years that we've measured athletes. Other say bodybuilders that would take steroids, they could go beyond that. They could easily go to 6 or even more. But that was more with performance enhancing drugs rather than natural.
So did ISAK essentially then originate from that specific experience that you had? Was there another individual
No.
involved? So how did it come to be essentially?
ISAK started incorporating the muscle to bone ratio last year. ISAK has been around officially since 1978 and started these ISAK certification courses in 1996 based on the Australian program. And their objective was that everybody measures the same. The idea behind ISAK is that, if we all measure different, then we cannot pool data or compare data, especially across countries and sports. So the idea was to standardize the measurements and the technique and the equipment. So that was the main emphasis. ISAK was never really concerned with the theory component. What you did with those measurements, they just wanted you to measure well, bone breadths, bone lengths, girths, and skin folds, and height and weight. So what you did with those numbers afterwards, that was your business. So if you like the Jackson and Pollock equation for body fat, you use that one. You plug the data in there. If you like the Durnin and Walmsley equation, you plug it into that. If you like somatotype, you calculate that with the data. But the main emphasis of ISAK was to standardize and make sure everybody measures similarly, or as similar as possible. It's not perfect, but and to try and reduce the margin of error, the in-between measurements error between two people, try to reduce that to a tolerable level so that you can compare measurements. That's the objective of ISAK. And it's only recently that ISAK started becoming interested in the 5-way fractionation, anatomical fractionation system of body composition. And from there, we derive the muscle to bone ratio. Before that, in many courses, in most courses around the world, it is not taught.
Yeah, a couple things there. So with the skin fold, the height, weight, bone breadth, and also the girth measurements, were those all just essentially pieces of the puzzle? And then eventually, back in 1978, they kind of saw those things as one entity and were able to get much more information and feedback from that to then able to apply it to make the suggestions from there.
Basically, the anthropometric measurements came about,
Probably years ago.
centuries ago. Height and weight, were always measured. But these specific measurements really started in the late 19th century, after Darwin published his book in 1859, and then anthropologists from around the world and paleontologists started getting engineering equipment and started measuring bones of extinct animals and humans. And those techniques are detailed in anthropometry manuals from the 19th century, the Martin and Saller books from Germany in late 19th century. And then in the early 20th century, especially in between the two world wars, they started measuring human beings, live human beings. They started measuring their bone structure, and they were interested in their work capacity. There was to see what kind of soldiers they could be, or farmers or workers. So then they started measuring girths for muscle mass, to assess muscle mass, and skin folds to deduct it from the girth so that you could get a corrected muscle girth, and started with muscle mass equations. This all came about in, when was this? Matiejka, Jindřich Matiejka, anthropologist from Czech Republic, he published his book probably 1921, and that's what came about. That's when it started getting interest, mainly in East Europe. In America, a lot of the interest came about in 1941, 1940, when Navy physician Albert Benke, he was in charge of recruiting all the soldiers to go to the war. And anybody that was too heavy for their height, according to the life insurance tables, was supposedly not a good soldier, so they would let them go. And Albert Benke measured all the Washington Redskin football players back then, when they were called the Washington Redskins. And, most of them were not allowed to be soldiers because they were too heavy for their height. And Albert Benke said, okay, but they're heavy, but it's muscle. It's not fat. So then he developed the underwater weighing technique to assess body fat from body density. And that became the criterion measure in the Western Hemisphere. So you had East Europe measuring anthropometry and muscle mass and bone mass. And then you had the Western world, America and Europe, measuring body composition with underwater weighing, which was just fat and lean body mass, okay? And then you had the Iron Curtain after the war. So communication was very hard between the two sections. And those two models developed on their own. A chemical model, say, in Western Hemisphere, fat as a chemical entity and lean body mass as another chemical entity. And from there, you have other derived technological models like bioelectrical impedance, which is another chemical model which divides the body into body water, body fat, and lean tissue. And then you have excellent methods like DEXA, densitometry, which divides the body into its bone mineral content, which is not the weight of the skeleton. It's just the ash of the skeleton, which is about 30% of the real weight of the skeleton. And then you have the fat or lipid component, and then you have the lean mass component. And on the other side of the Iron Curtain, you had some anatomical body composition models like Matiejka's, and it was a Canadian professor from Simon Fraser University in Vancouver that went to Eastern Europe, learned about these methods, and developed the anatomical five-way fractionation, which divides the body not into the fat and lean components, but into the anatomically defined components, adipose tissue as opposed to fat. So in adipose tissue, you're including the water, about 10% water. And then the muscle mass by itself, which is chemically 22% protein, 75% water, but muscle mass by itself, and the weight of the skeleton as a whole entity, with its water, with its fat, with its protein component, and its calcium carbonate and everything you see in the bone mineral content. Now, Bill developed this model and validated it with an extensive cadaver study where they dissected 27 cadavers in Belgium in the 1980s. And he developed this model of body composition, which nobody used, which nobody really liked because it involved a lot of measurements. It was complex. It wasn't mainstream. It didn't appear in PubMed, so nobody used it. And then it was using anthropometry, which was regarded as sort of behind the new technologies of bioelectrical impedance, infrared interactance, and DEXA. But I had to use it in Argentina because I didn't have any money for these beautiful machines.
You got to use what you got at the end of the day. You can't get picky.
Yeah, so I had to use these inexpensive tools and this leftover forgotten model from Canada, Western Canada. And but it turned out to be really useful. So we used it successfully in nutrition, in exercise and performance. And then we published some work, and word got around. And until Dr. Aaron Wellman, strength and conditioning coach of the Giants, took me over there to New York and we started playing around with it, see if it worked in football. And it really, it worked, and it provided some extra information to complement other methods. So people started, he's quite credible. Mm-hmm. And word got around, and he called his buddies in the strength and conditioning. Then the Exos Academy started adopting it, and we ended up measuring about 20 professional teams in football, basketball, baseball, so ice hockey. So it's not a perfect tool, but it complements information from other methods.
I got a lot of questions. I'm going to back up a little bit.
Sure, I gave a lot of history and information.
No, I think having the background, the history is really important. So you have a better gratitude and understanding about who kind of laid the foundation until the point that we're at now, which I think is really important. Going back to Europe, so did you feel when they started utilizing this, was it more for talent identification? Was it for, we're trying to see what the difference is between lean mass, fat mass, and then hopefully provides us an idea to how to progress and provide the best approaches from a nutrition and training standpoint?
Well, in Eastern Europe, they started using anthropometry in the 50s and 60s for talent identification purposes. In the former Soviet Union, especially the same model was sort of transmitted to every other former communist country like Hungary, Czech Republic, Eastern Germany used it quite successfully. And also in the Western Hemisphere, Cuba. Cuba was a communist country, so their sports medicine people went to study in Leipzig, in Eastern Germany. So they adopted these methods, mainly height, sitting height, to get an idea of trunk length and leg length, and then arm span, arm length, then some bone structure, some lean mass indicators by height. And they started using that for talent identification purposes, yes. But it was rudimentary. And then in the late 1980s, Australia wanted to become a sports power. They only gained 2 medals at the 76 Olympics in Montreal. And so they started on this huge talent identification program. When the Iron Curtain fell in late 80s, early 90s, about 100 of their sports scientists were hired by Australia. So a lot of these methods were taken there. And it was also the time when Dr. Deborah Kerr, Australian dietitian that began the Australian Institute of Sport, she had done her master's in Simon Fraser University with Bill Ross. So she took the anthropometry over there, and it became the official standardized anthropometry technique in Australia. And Australia started using it in the early 1990s for talent ID, started measuring children and adolescents and identifying talent. And Australia is a country of 18 million people, which,
In
from
comparison to like some of these other bigger countries, it's not very big.
no, it's not big at all. I mean, it's less people than, that live in, say, Alabama or something like that.
Right.
And, they started from the 2000 Olympics where they got 54 medals. They started getting 50, 40 medals per Olympic game. So their medals per capita ratio, they would get an Olympic medal for every 500,000 people that they had.
That's
to give you an
crazy.
idea, yeah. So to give you an idea, in the United States, that wins 100 medals per Olympic game, but you have 300 million people. So you needed 3 million people to get one medal. These guys were getting medals with 500,000 people. Same as Cuba. So to me, it was basic. These guys are meddling with our statistics. What the hell are they doing? So I went to Cuba and I went to Australia to study what they were doing. And they were doing the same thing. Even if it was a communist country or a capitalist country, it didn't matter. They started with anthropometry to identify talent. And then, they had the data from elite athletes to say, okay, you want to be a good swimmer, your arm span has to be 187 centimeters or more. You want to be a basketball player, you want to be this, and that. So that's how they started their programs.
So you mentioned several different times DEXA, BIA, underwater weighing, obviously ISAK. When you're talking to practitioners, like what kind of conversations do you have to help determine maybe what's going to work best for them or their environment, or maybe the easiest, because obviously schedules and routines are really crazy just to get athletes pinned down to get an hour to even get them to do something. So how do you have those conversations with practitioners?
Okay, this is my view, my personal view. I see all these tools. I imagine I'm a carpenter, okay? And I have, as a carpenter, I have hammer, I have screwdriver, I have a saw, I have a chisel, okay? And I cannot say, oh, the screwdriver is better than the hammer. Forget hammers. Screwdriver for everybody. No. The question is, what do I need to do? Do I need to cut this board in two? Then I choose a saw. Do I need to put a nail through these two boards? Then I choose a hammer. So I see underwater weighing, bioelectrical impedance, DEXA, anatomical anthropometry, body composition as different tools. And within the context or the problem that you're trying to solve, you choose the tool that's according, to your needs. If I'm in a research lab trying to find out whether, a protein supplement or a training regimen will help, I don't know, lose body fat and preserve lean body mass, and I want to publish this research, I would probably use DEXA, for example. Or if I'm studying, say, postmenopausal women and osteoporosis, definitely DEXA. If I'm in a nutrition consulting for diabetes or some recreational athletes and I don't have too much time, I would use bioelectrical impedance. If I have athletes like soccer players that, they don't need to be abnormal in size. So what's important to them? Body fat. So I can use any of these tools or just skin folds and get a caliper and measure a few skin folds and that's it, add them up. Now, in sports like American football or rugby or baseball, you need abnormal people. You need people with abnormal proportions, with abnormal skeletons, and abnormal amounts of muscle mass. Okay, so in this scenario, the anatomical fractionation model works very good. And you can measure someone in 6 minutes, like we do at the Combine, and get a lot of information. And we can predict how much muscle they can put on according to the skeleton, whether the skeleton matches the characteristics of an offensive lineman or a defensive lineman or a linebacker. So this method is quite useful. This anthropometry method is also useful because, it's hard to do DEXAs every month.
Yeah.
And apparently, correct me if I'm wrong, but the player association does not allow more than 2 DEXAs per year. So I may be wrong on this.
Yeah, there's the radiation component. So the frequency in which you can do that,
Okay.
the exposure,
All
they
right.
want to limit it. So yeah, I mean, let's
That's,
say even max maybe three times a year, for example. So that's, I like what you're saying there,
okay.
because then for that example, like whether it's ISAK or BIA, if you want to do it more frequently and it's not going to harm or hurt the athlete,
Right.
having that secondary option, if that's what you have available, then that may be what you have to use in that
Yeah.
point.
There you go. And then the other problem is a lot of the athletes don't fit into the machine.
Yes.
So, but anyway, but I like DEXA, and DEXA can give me information that anthropometry cannot give me. So I like to complement, I like to use all the tools. But if I'm in a locker room with athletes and they give me 2 minutes to evaluate each athlete, then I would just do weight and skin folds on a monthly basis. Instead of going through the whole protocol, calibrating the machine and everything. So it depends what your situation is and what kind of information you need. And then you choose the right tools, whether that's one of them or 3 of them. That's my take on it,
I liked your analogy, and I like that you're also open. Like you're not just like, I just use ISAK. You're just like,
No way.
the
No
environment, the
way.
situation, like all these
Yeah.
different determinants are going to put you in the position then for you as a practitioner to make the best decision. There's no one fit all at the end of the day.
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. So the problem is people tend to categorize or see this as a competition between methods, and it's not. By all means, it's different information.
Are we helping the athlete get better? And are we getting the appropriate information that's going to make sense to us as a whole?
Exactly.
Like
There you go.
KISS method, just keep it simple, you know?
Yes, keep it simple. Yeah. And yeah, it's the context. The context determines, what tool you use.
So what kind of like if you look at all the different disciplines within, let's say, a high performance department or a sports medicine department, right? You have athletic training, physical therapy, strength, nutrition, possibly mental conditioning. What kind of data can each of these practitioners get that they can then
Okay.
apply to their specific domains that's then going to
All right.
possibly make a difference in how they do their assessments, their testing, their prescriptions, maybe even return to play, for example, from an injury?
Yeah. Yeah, that's an excellent question, Sean. The thing about anthropometry is it unifies a lot of these sports science fields under the umbrella of sports science. For example, dietitians can use it to assess body composition in, say, to try and achieve the optimal amount of body mass, of weight, body fat, and also muscle mass. The main driver of performance is not body fat, it's muscle mass.
Yeah.
So in my opinion, assessing muscle mass by itself and gearing nutrition with exercise to the ideal amount of muscle mass is, to me, the main issue in sports nutrition body composition. And at the elite level, you don't really have problems of body fat. Everybody's got to the elite level because their body fat is appropriate for what they do. The main difference is muscle mass. So in nutrition, it's easy. Then in exercise science, in sports and in strength and conditioning, it's also quite interesting, because a lot of the body proportions can help explain why this guy can do a deep squat without injuring themselves, and why this guy can bench a lot more than the other guy because his arms are shorter or whatever. So it can help with program design. It can help with mitigating injuries that could occur from overuse in the gym.
Mhm.
And it also is a way to assess strength and fitness. For example, at the Exos Academies, they're working on a test to assess the fitness of two players that have the same amount of muscle mass.
Hmm.
How can you train that same amount of muscle mass and make it more efficient for game day, for instance? Make it more agile or whatever. So it can help the strength and conditioning coaches a lot. And also in rehab, to bring back the muscle back to normal. And also in injuries, to study whether certain body proportions make you more prone to injuries or not. Is it the case that a smaller knee breadth will make you more prone to injuries or whatever? Or having a short trunk or long legs or whatever. That remains to be studied. And I've also been working a lot with the talent identification people and the statisticians that and the people that in the draft in choosing players.
Mhm.
So that's information that they're using quite a lot and basing a lot of the decisions on that in order to purchase a player, whether this player can reach the muscle mass that's needed to be, I don't know, an offensive lineman, or whether this player has a skeleton that is more prone to injuries, that kind of thing.
I had talked to a couple dietitians at that level, and it's just so interesting now that the fact that we're able to integrate ourselves into the scouting department. I think that
Oh,
the
yes.
really key example they gave me was like, if you have a tight end that transitions over to, let's say, offensive lineman, but in reality their bone structure isn't able to contain that much overall weight or overall, let's say, lean mass, and it's going to put them at the higher position to possibly get injured or long-term problems over time. So it's like, yeah, they've been playing left tackle for the last 3 years, but in reality, like, they're probably not going to be able to sustain that mass for X amount of more years. So it's like you either need to switch him back to tight end or switch him to this position, because that's what the body framing or the ISAK testing is giving us information back. And like you said, from the last couple of years, you guys have been at the combine doing this testing. Now you're creating that kind of data set that allows you to see each of those positions to figure out, all right, here's our ranges, and here's where we think like you're going to have the best success based off of all these different metrics. And we're going to draft you at this rate, at this place for this reason, versus just off your talent alone, for example, or just because you run a fast 40-yard. Like, it's just so much more complex now.
Yeah, you're right on the dot, right on the dot. So I'm learning as I work with these strength and conditioning coaches and dietitians and scout agents in the US with football and ice hockey. And there's a lot of very smart people there, and they have a lot of ideas and a good eye and experience. And they are finding new applications for the anatomical body composition and the muscle to bone ratio, such as the one you've just mentioned. Another interesting one from Aaron and the Exos people is they've been working on bringing down the muscle mass, the muscle hypertrophy in wide receivers and cornerbacks. which
Well,
is counterintuitive, you know.
I'll give you a key example right there, like a story there. So I was recently working with a basketball player that was almost 7 foot and 350 to 360 pounds, right? And centers aren't that weight anymore. Like they're not big bangers in the middle. Like they're obviously much faster, much leaner, typically under like 300 pounds. And he was barely able to move, couldn't even do a pull up, like just function wise out on the court in the weight room, just couldn't do what we wanted him or needed him to do. We got his weight over time, over a couple of years, finally down to like 300 to 305, and he lost a significant amount of muscle mass, but his frame just could not carry that much mass in general. So once we finally got his weight down, even though he lost weight mass and fat mass together, we got him up to doing push-ups on a TRX, elevated. He was able to do 10 pull-ups. His speed, his movement on the court was much
10
better.
pull-ups. Wow.
Yes, I know. I was just as shocked when he did it. I was there when he did it. But and had conversation with our team and our strength and conditioning coach, and as a dietitian, you're kind of indoctrinated like, oh, we don't want him to lose muscle mass. Like that's bad. Like that's not good.
Yeah.
Like we're not doing our job. He's under fueling. But like in
Uh-huh.
that specific case, it's just what he needed
Well,
to do.
that's very interesting what you've just said, because what we're working on is on achieving the optimal amount of muscle mass, not the maximal one.
Yep.
I think we are all quite influenced by, I don't know, maybe bodybuilding, or that bodybuilding was the forerunner of strength and conditioning and sports nutrition 40 years ago.
Get as
So
big
it
as
was,
possible was the mantra.
yeah, get as big as possible, get as big as possible. So yeah, maybe the optimal amount of muscle mass is different from the maximal amount of muscle mass, unless you're a bodybuilder.
Yeah,
Or
it's
alignment.
definitely interesting. There's definitely a lot of thought processes and ideas out there that are kind of being developed. So I'm really excited to see how this transforms over the years.
Fantastic.
But
Well,
Francis, appreciate it. You're definitely a wealth of knowledge there. We got a really good spectrum of where everything started from a body composition standpoint to what's kind of happening now in the modern day with athletics and where it's being utilized. So I think this will be a really useful podcast to our viewers. I'm going
thank
to
you.
put all of
Hope so.
your contact information, your site down below in the bio. So if anyone wants to contact you or have a conversation like this, they can. My information is also in my link on Instagram. Will also be in YouTube and my other social media sources there too. If you also want to listen to more podcasts like this. But
Yep.
Francis, I appreciate your
Good
time.
job.
Thank you very
Good job
much.
you do. Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's an honor.